In 1189, as Minamoto no Yoshitsune sat in the temple where he would soon take his own life, surrounded by the forces of his own brother who had come to destroy him, he discovered something that changed not just his final moments, but revealed the most powerful psychological defense mechanism ever conceived by the human mind. The man who had never lost a battle, who had revolutionized warfare itself, was about to teach us the only lesson that truly matters when the entire world turns against you. What he realized in those final hours was not some mystical revelation or philosophical abstraction, but a practical, brutal method for protecting your mind that is so effective, so simple, yet so contrary to everything you have been taught about how to handle adversity, that most people reject it immediately because it requires you to do the exact opposite of what every instinct in your body tells you to do. This is not another self-help technique designed to make you feel better temporarily, while changing nothing fundamentally about your situation. This is the psychological equivalent of military-grade armor that Yoshitsune forged in the crucible of absolute betrayal. And once you understand it, once you truly internalize its devastating simplicity, no external circumstance will ever have the power to disturb your inner equilibrium again. I need to warn you before we continue that what I am about to share will challenge everything you believe about how to protect yourself from emotional pain, how to deal with betrayal, and how to maintain your sanity when life becomes overwhelming. The reason most people remain perpetually vulnerable to the attacks of others, constantly triggered by circumstances beyond their control, endlessly seeking validation and approval from a world that will never consistently provide either, is because they have been taught exactly the wrong strategy for mental self-defense. Every piece of advice you have received about building confidence, finding inner peace, or developing emotional resilience has been focused on the wrong target entirely. And until you understand what Yoshitsune discovered in that temple, you will continue to be at the mercy of every criticism, every setback, every disappointment that comes your way. But here is what I need you to understand first, and I want you to really pay attention to this, because recognizing this pattern in your own life is the beginning of everything that follows. Have you ever noticed that the people who seem most confident, most unshakable, most immune to the chaos around them, are not the ones trying the hardest to feel good about themselves? Have you ever wondered why your efforts to build self-esteem, to think positively, to protect yourself from negative influences seem to make you more sensitive, more reactive, more dependent on external validation rather than less? If you have spent years trying to strengthen your mind only to find yourself feeling more fragile than when you started, if you have consumed countless hours of motivational content and still find yourself devastated by a single critical comment or unexpected setback, then you have been practicing exactly the wrong approach to mental self-defense. And I want you to pause right now and write in the comments, I have been building walls instead of becoming water. This simple acknowledgement will not only help others who are struggling with the same pattern recognize that they are not alone, but it will prepare your mind for the radical shift in thinking that Yoshitsune is about to teach you. The story begins not with his triumph, but with his complete destruction. Yoshitsune had achieved something that should have made him invincible to any form of psychological attack. He had proven his genius on the battlefield time and time again, earned the respect of warriors throughout Japan, and secured victories that seemed impossible to everyone except him. By every measure that society uses to determine worth and value, he was untouchable. Yet here he was, facing death not from a worthy enemy on the battlefield, but from the calculated cruelty of his own family. His brother Yoritomo, consumed by jealousy and political calculation, had decided that Yoshitsune's very existence was a threat that needed to be eliminated. The man who had helped establish the Kamakura shogunate, who had secured Yoritomo's position of power, was being hunted like a common criminal by the very person he had served most loyally. In that temple, surrounded by an overwhelming force sent to capture or kill him, Yoshitsune faced a choice that reveals the essence of human nature itself. He could rage against the injustice, protest his innocence, demand the recognition he deserved, fight desperately against the inevitable outcome, or he could do something that would transform his final act from a tragedy into a masterclass in psychological invulnerability. What Yoshitsune realized in that moment was the fundamental error that destroys most people long before they face their final crisis. He understood that all human suffering, all psychological vulnerability, all mental anguish comes from a single source that most people never identify because they are too busy trying to manage its symptoms rather than address its root cause. The source is not external circumstances, not other people's actions, not even genuine threats to your safety or well-being. The source is your attachment to outcomes you cannot control, your emotional investment in how others perceive you, and your desperate need for reality to conform to your expectations about how things should be. Every moment of anxiety you experience comes from wanting something to be different than it is. Every experience of anger or resentment comes from believing that people should behave differently than they do. Every feeling of depression or hopelessness comes from comparing your actual circumstances to some imagined version of how your life was supposed to unfold. Yoshitsune saw that his entire psychological suffering came not from his brother's betrayal, not from the injustice of his situation, not from the approaching soldiers, but from his continued attachment to the idea that loyalty should be rewarded, that justice should prevail, that his contributions should be recognized and valued. The brutal teaching that emerged from this recognition was not to try harder to make people appreciate him, not to fight more fiercely for justice, not to find ways to cope with disappointment and betrayal, but to completely sever his emotional investment in any outcome beyond his own actions in the present moment. This is what most people cannot accept, because it appears to require giving up on everything that makes life meaningful, everything worth fighting for, everything that motivates human effort and achievement. But what Yoshitsune discovered was exactly the opposite. When you release your attachment to outcomes you cannot control, when you stop needing external validation to feel complete, when you become genuinely indifferent to whether people understand your value or not, you do not become passive or unmotivated. You become unstoppable because nothing can threaten you anymore. The person who has nothing left to lose has already won every psychological battle before it begins. Let me share with you exactly how this works in practical terms, because understanding the principle intellectually means nothing if you cannot apply it to transform your daily experience. Think about the last time someone criticized you, dismissed your efforts, or treated you with disrespect. Notice what happened in your mind immediately after that experience. You probably spent considerable mental energy crafting responses, imagining conversations where you defend yourself, feeling angry about their lack of understanding, or worried about what others might think based on their opinion. All of that mental activity was driven by your attachment to being perceived correctly, your need for them to recognize your worth, your emotional investment in their approval. What if instead, in that exact moment, you had responded with the complete indifference that Yoshitsune cultivated? Not fake indifference, not suppressed anger disguised as calm, but genuine emotional detachment from their opinion about you. This does not mean becoming cold or cruel or uncaring about people in general. It means becoming strategically indifferent to anything outside your direct control, especially other people's thoughts, feelings, and reactions to your existence. The practical application begins with a simple but revolutionary shift in how you define success and failure. Most people define success by external outcomes. Whether they get the job, whether their relationship works out, whether others recognize their efforts, whether their goals are achieved according to their timeline. This definition guarantees psychological vulnerability because it makes your emotional state dependent on factors you cannot control. Yoshitsune's approach redefines success as the consistent execution of your principles, regardless of outcome. Success becomes showing up with integrity, whether people appreciate it or not. Success becomes doing your best work, whether it gets recognized or not. Success becomes treating people with respect, whether they reciprocate or not. When your sense of accomplishment depends entirely on what you can control, which is only your own actions and decisions, then no external circumstance can diminish you. This principle transforms every area of your life in ways that initially seem paradoxical, but prove to be profoundly liberating. In relationships, instead of constantly monitoring whether the other person is meeting your expectations, appreciating your efforts, or reciprocating your energy, you focus solely on being the kind of person you respect, regardless of how they respond. This does not mean accepting abuse or staying in unhealthy situations. It means making decisions about relationships based on your own values and observations, rather than your need for specific responses from others. When you no longer need people to validate your worth through their behavior towards you, you become free to engage authentically without the desperate undercurrent of seeking approval that makes most human interactions exhausting and unsatisfying. In your career and professional life, this approach eliminates the chronic stress that comes from needing others to recognize your contribution, promote you according to your timeline, or appreciate your unique perspective. You continue to perform excellent work. You continue to pursue opportunities and advocate for yourself, but your emotional equilibrium no longer depends on getting the outcomes you want when you want them. The psychological freedom this creates actually makes you more effective, not less. Because you can take calculated risks without being paralyzed by fear of rejection. You can present your ideas confidently without being devastated if they are not accepted. And you can navigate office politics without taking anything personally because you understand that other people's behavior reflects their own psychology, not your value as a human being. Most importantly, this teaching provides an unshakable foundation for your self-concept that cannot be threatened by any external event. Your worth is not determined by your achievements, your relationships, your financial situation, your social status, or any other circumstantial factor that could change tomorrow. Your worth exists because you exist, period. This is not positive thinking or self-affirmation. This is a recognition of an objective fact that requires no external validation. When you truly understand this, when you internalize it at a level deeper than intellectual comprehension, criticism becomes meaningless noise, rejection becomes irrelevant data, and failure becomes simply information for adjustment rather than evidence of your inadequacy. The reason this teaching feels brutal to most people is because it requires you to abandon the fantasy that you can control how your life unfolds, that you can make people treat you fairly, that you can force reality to match your preferences. It requires accepting that you live in a universe that operates according to its own principles rather than your personal desires, and that your peace of mind depends entirely on aligning yourself with that reality rather than fighting against it. This acceptance is not resignation or defeat. It is the ultimate empowerment because it places your emotional well-being entirely within your control where it belongs. As Yoshitsune prepared for his final act, he demonstrated this teaching in the most profound way possible. He did not spend his remaining time raging against the injustice, plotting revenge, or desperately trying to change an outcome that was already determined. He performed the ritual of seppuku with the same precision and dignity he had brought to every other important action in his life, because his value as a person had never depended on living forever, being understood by his family, or receiving the recognition he deserved. His final act became a masterpiece of psychological strength, because it was performed without any attachment to how others would interpret it, remember it, or learn from it. This is the level of mental invulnerability that becomes available to you when you truly embrace Yoshitsune's teaching. Not the shallow confidence that depends on everything going your way, not the fragile self-esteem that crumbles at the first sign of criticism, but the unshakable inner strength that comes from knowing that no external circumstance can diminish your essential worth or disturb your fundamental peace. When you reach this level of psychological development, you become truly free to live according to your own values, pursue your own goals, and contribute your own unique gifts without needing permission, approval, or validation from anyone else. But before we conclude, let me share with you the most practical exercise that will allow you to begin implementing Yoshitsune's teaching immediately. Because understanding these concepts intellectually means nothing if you cannot translate them into actual changes in how you respond to daily challenges. Tonight, before you sleep, I want you to identify the one situation in your current life that triggers the most emotional reactivity, the person or circumstance that has the most power to disturb your peace of mind, the thing that keeps you awake at night worrying, or makes your stomach tighten with anxiety when you think about it. Once you have identified this trigger, I want you to practice the exercise that Yoshitsune would have used to prepare his mind for any psychological attack. Close your eyes and imagine the absolute worst-case scenario related to this situation unfolding exactly as you fear it will. Do not try to think positively or imagine better outcomes. Instead, lean into the fear and allow yourself to fully experience the emotional discomfort of this imagined scenario. But here is the crucial part. As you sit with this discomfort, remind yourself that your worth as a human being remains completely unchanged, regardless of what happens in this situation. Practice separating your essential self from the circumstances you cannot control, and notice that even in the worst-case scenario, you still exist, you still have value, you still have the capacity to respond with dignity and strength. This exercise is not about becoming pessimistic or expecting the worst. It is about training your nervous system to remain calm and centered regardless of external outcomes, so that you can think clearly and act effectively no matter what challenges arise. The transformation that occurs when you master this approach is not subtle or gradual. It is immediate and unmistakable. People around you will notice that something fundamental has shifted in your energy, in your presence, in the way you respond to pressure and adversity. You will find yourself naturally attracting more respect and genuine connection, because desperation and neediness are invisible repellents that most people instinctively avoid. while authentic self-possession is magnetic in a way that no amount of trying to impress others can replicate. The relationships in your life will improve not because you are working harder to please people, but because you are interacting from a place of wholeness rather than seeking others to fill some perceived emptiness within yourself. Professional opportunities will increase not because you are networking more aggressively, but because decision-makers are drawn to individuals who demonstrate consistent performance regardless of external pressures, and who can be trusted to maintain their effectiveness even when things do not go according to plan. Perhaps most importantly, you will discover that happiness was never the goal anyway, because happiness depends on circumstances aligning with your preferences, which places your emotional state outside your control and guarantees periodic disappointment. What Yoshitsune found instead was something far more valuable: contentment that does not depend on external conditions, peace that cannot be disturbed by other people's choices, and strength that grows stronger under pressure rather than being depleted by it. This is the difference between the temporary high of getting what you want and the permanent satisfaction of needing nothing from anyone else to feel complete exactly as you are in this moment. The reason most personal development approaches fail to create lasting change is because they focus on adding new skills, habits, or mindsets to your existing psychological structure, rather than addressing the fundamental architecture of how you relate to reality itself. They teach you to build better coping mechanisms for anxiety, rather than eliminating the source of anxiety entirely. They show you how to communicate more effectively, to get better responses from people, rather than becoming genuinely indifferent to how people respond to your communication. They help you develop more sophisticated strategies for achieving your goals, rather than questioning whether your emotional well-being should depend on achieving those goals at all. Yoshitsune's approach cuts through all of these surface-level modifications and goes directly to the root of human psychological suffering, which is the mistaken belief that your inner state should be determined by outer circumstances rather than by your chosen response to whatever circumstances arise. Once you begin practicing this level of psychological independence, you will understand why Yoshitsune could face death with such composure, and why his final act became legendary not for its tragedy, but for its demonstration of ultimate mental mastery. He had discovered that there is no external force powerful enough to diminish someone who has stopped seeking anything from outside themselves. No insult cutting enough to wound someone who does not need others to validate their worth. No threat intimidating enough to control someone who has made peace with uncertainty and impermanence. This is not spiritual bypassing or philosophical detachment from reality. This is the most practical wisdom available to human beings because it is the only approach that places your emotional stability entirely within your own hands, where it belongs. The ancient samurai understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. That mental strength is not about positive thinking or self-confidence or any other feeling state that comes and goes based on circumstances. Mental strength is about developing the capacity to remain functional and effective regardless of what you are feeling, to maintain your principles and standards regardless of how others are behaving, and to continue moving toward your goals regardless of the obstacles that appear or the setbacks that occur. This is why warriors throughout history have been trained not to avoid fear, but to act effectively while afraid. Not to eliminate anger, but to channel it constructively. Not to prevent sadness, but to continue their mission despite grief. The goal is not emotional comfort, but emotional mastery. Not the absence of difficult feelings, but the ability to function optimally regardless of which feelings are present. When you apply this understanding to your everyday challenges, everything changes. That difficult conversation you have been avoiding becomes an opportunity to practice communicating your truth without attachment to the outcome. That rejection you experienced becomes data about compatibility rather than evidence of your inadequacy. That criticism you received becomes useful feedback to consider rather than an attack on your character to defend against. That financial setback becomes a chance to demonstrate resourcefulness rather than proof that you are destined to struggle. This shift in interpretation is not about deluding yourself or pretending that problems do not matter. It is about responding to problems from a position of psychological strength rather than vulnerability, which always leads to better practical outcomes as well as greater inner peace. If this ancient wisdom has resonated with something deep inside you, if you recognize that you have been seeking strength in all the wrong places and are ready to develop the kind of mental armor that Yoshitsune forged in his darkest hour, then I want you to take one simple action that will help this message reach others who desperately need to hear it. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell because this channel is dedicated to bringing you the most powerful psychological insights from history's greatest minds, presented in a way that you can actually apply to transform your daily experience. And before you go, I want you to leave a comment sharing which of these principles you are most excited to start practicing, because your engagement not only helps the algorithm spread this content to people who need it most, but creates a community of individuals committed to developing authentic inner strength rather than just feeling better temporarily. The path that Yoshitsune walked is not easy, but it leads to a destination that most people never reach: complete psychological freedom in a chaotic world.